Hello there, listeners to the Bylines Network podcast, and welcome to another episode of the Bylines Network Reports. This week, Mark Cunliffe and Anna Adamski of Central Bylines and East Anglia Bylines respectively, his recent book, The Canopy of Titans, co-written with Jessica Applegate, a link of which can be found in the description of this very episode, and about rainforest carbon capture. Please enjoy.
Hi, I'm Mark Cunliffe from Central Bylines, and I'm joined today by my colleague Anna Adamski from East Anglia Bylines for a podcast with Koberstein, who along with co-author Jessica Applegate wrote a book called Canopy of Titans, The Life and Times of the Great North American Temperate Rainforest. It's about the links between climate changes and changes in forestation levels. So good morning to you, Paul, in the US.
Good morning, Mark and Anna. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Hello. Yeah, lovely to see you. You know, here it's lunchtime, but you're sitting with lights on there. What time is it over there?
It is 4 a.m. if you can believe it. I have my coffee. I'm okay. I got 4 hours sleep. It should be enough.
Let's hope so.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much for getting up at 4 to join us.
Sure.
So, Paul, before we get to science, can you tell us what led you to write Canopy of Titans? What brought you in personally to this story?
Well, this book was very much an adventure and a journey of discovery. I did not know a lot about carbon and forest and the relationship between forest and climate. And so for me, this was very much a learning experience. I began working on this book with Jessica when we had President Trump, his first term, wanted to log a lot of areas in Southeast Alaska that had been declared off limits by a previous president, Bill Clinton. And we wanted to know what's going on with that. We flew to Juneau and hopped over to Sitka and nosed around and found out what was going on, interviewed a lot of people, and did a lot of reading of scientific papers. And first we wanted to do a magazine article about this idea. And we discovered we had too much material, so we wrote a book. So here we are with the book.
So many climate conversations seem to focus on cutting emissions. I believe your book argues that it's even if we stop burning fossil fuels, that still won't be enough. Why is that?
That is absolutely correct. If we need to stop burning fossil fuels, obviously, and convert to wind and solar, as you folks are there in East Anglia. But we have 300 years of carbon emissions that are accumulating in the air that we've been putting there from burning fossil fuels during the industrial age. And that most of that carbon is still in the air and it's causing the planet to heat up. If we stop burning fossil fuels, we won't put more carbon in the air, but we won't do anything about the legacy carbon. And we found that the best way, really the only way, the only affordable way, efficient way to remove that carbon from the air is a forest. A forest absorbs carbon dioxide through the process of photosynthesis and stores it in its bones until it falls over and dies. But meanwhile, it's performing a huge service to the planet for the purpose of storing carbon. And that's why one of the reasons we like trees. We have a lot of trees in our region, as you know.
It's a beautiful part of the world there. It's very, very green, the whole Pacific Northwest. And you actually have your own rainforest up there. Now, you've described forests as the only proven scalable form of carbon capture that we currently have. Why do you think forests succeed where engineered carbon capture is failing?
Well, it's not like we're not trying. I mean, companies like Exxon, BP, the governments of UK and the United States have been investing billions of dollars into this technology, carbon capture and storage, they call it. And they've been doing this for years. And so far, they've been able to capture on the order of 1% of 1% of all the annual emissions through this technology, which is not even a drop in the bucket. I mean, at this rate, we're going to destroy the planet before we solve that problem. The other part, though, is that trees are already performing the service free of charge, and they do it, as I said, free of um, more efficiently than anything else we've come up with. They can do the entire job all by themselves. What we have to do, though, is not cut them down. The old trees, the mature trees, the trees that are big, are the ones that store the most carbon. And if we protect those, we can do a lot to resolve the climate crisis. One point that people make is that, well, why don't we just protect the Amazon and the tropical forests? And that certainly is a thing we should do. But what people don't realize is that these forests here in the temperate part of the world, about outside the tropical zone, store by far more carbon than per acre than any other forest in the world. And it's simply more efficient, more cost effective to protect these forests for that purpose.
That's interesting. So, I mean, there is a persistent idea that old growth forests are basically carbon neutral, so aren't useful anymore for climate mitigation. So you're saying that's wrong?
That's completely wrong, and that's a trope that the timber industry likes to pass along. The fact of the matter is that these trees, at least ones in this region, this rainforest, live for 1,000 years or so, and they store an enormous amount of carbon. And they, as they get older, they still continue to add more. So to say that old growth trees are carbon neutral is just simply ridiculous.
So, in terms of carbon capture, you're saying that the ones that they're working on are capturing virtually nothing. What is the reason for that? Is that a technology problem or a cost problem or a physics problem? Do you have any idea?
I gather that it's a physics problem because a lot of people, very smart people, have put a lot of money forward towards this and have been unable to capture very much carbon at all. They want to. I'm not a physicist. I'm not a scientist at all. So I'm coming at this with the understanding of a journalist. And what I see is a lot of money spent, nothing happening. And the reasons for that, I'm sure are technical roadblocks that they're jamming up against, but I'm not really sure exactly how they are playing out. But all I know is it's not working.
When people hear the words rainforest, they usually think of the Amazon, me included. So I thought, for our listeners, what is temperate rainforest?
A temperate rainforest is simply a rainforest, a forest that gets a lot of rain. It's near the ocean. A temperate rainforest is in the world's temperate zone, which is outside the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. Great Britain used to have a temperate rainforest. They probably still have remnants of one scattered about. There are places in the world that have a little more than you guys have, like Chile and Australia and New Zealand. But these temperate rainforests have been largely logged. And so we have remnants of what used to be there. In this region, in the Pacific coast of North America, we still have a great amount of temperate rainforest. And there's been a fight over the last 30 years over the last 20%, which we still have. In other words, I should probably start by explaining what this rainforest is, where it is, and how big it is, because it is enormous. It's on the order of 27 million hectares, and
wow,
that's about 70 million acres. So it's very, very, very large. And over the last 150 years, the timber industry has been knocking them down left and right as fast as they can. And we are left with about 20% of what was originally here when white settlers arrived in this part of the world in the mid 1800s. So we're down to 20%, but this 20%, these are big trees, and they are growing, and they store a lot of carbon. The argument in protecting them is that if we protect these trees, they will continue to mitigate climate change, and that's badly needed. The policymakers have been slow to recognize this benefit, and so our book is a call to action to people around the world to realize that we have this great resource. If we protect it, we can do a lot for the climate. But a lot of education has to be done because people don't realize what it can do. and the benefits of protecting these forests.
But maybe you already covered this, but for me, one of the most striking claims that really sort of stuck out was that you're saying that these rainforests capture far more carbon per hectare than the Amazon. Why is that? I mean, why is that physically? Why is that one tree versus another tree collecting more?
Yeah, there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, half of the carbon in an old growth forest here is dead wood on the ground, or dead snags, or dead logs, dead branches and leaves. About half of the carbon is stored in the dead material that is slowly decaying, but is still a vital part of the carbon sink. In the Amazon, they don't have as much dead material that's being stored there. So because of the climate, because of the weather, it tends to decompose faster. So they don't have that kind of accumulation. Also, the trees here are enormous. We have dozens of trees that are over 300 feet tall. Very few places in the world have trees that size. There are some in Australia, but otherwise, these are the tallest, biggest trees in the world. And so the size of the tree is a huge factor. Typically, a tree in the Amazon won't get taller than 180 feet or so. So there's that advantage, the size advantage, and the deadwood are the two main factors, I would say.
Yeah, okay, it's really interesting.
You're talking about the California redwoods, or we associate them often with California. Do they go all the way up the coast through Oregon and Washington as well?
The rainforest starts about 40 miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge, and it extends all the way to Alaska, about 2,500 miles. Only the first 100 or so miles of that is redwood. North of California is the state of Oregon, where I live. The first 13 miles in Oregon have some redwoods along the coast, but most of the redwoods are in California. When you reach Oregon, the fauna changes to Douglas fir mainly and Sitka spruce along the coast, hemlock, other types of very big trees species. But the redwoods are mainly a California thing.
Yeah, you said we've got remnants of a temperate rainforest in this country, but remnants is absolutely the right word. I think there are patches in places like Cornwall, Wales, the Lake District, and Scotland, which are all west facing along the Atlantic coast. But for the most part, I think we've lost an awful lot, and it speaks to a problem, because here in the UK, we've got two issues at the moment happening. One is that major infrastructure projects like our high-speed rail from London to Birmingham, and there's a new nuclear power station under construction here in Suffolk, have levelled ancient woodlands. And the promise to plant new trees elsewhere has been said they'll do that to offset the loss. And also, there are companies that are planting trees to offset their emissions as a kind of a net zero thing. Now, what do you see as the flaw in that we'll plant more trees later argument?
Well, this is one of the things the timber industry likes to say, that they're going to, for every big tree they cut down, they promise to plant 3 little ones at least. The problem is that the big tree they cut down stores an enormous amount of carbon, and the little trees they plant won't be storing much carbon at all for decades. It'll be 100 years before, or more, before they match the carbon.
100 years? Really?
On the order of 100 years or more, because
Wow.
these trees they cut down are, 200, 300, 400 years old, largely. And so that's how long the little ones have to go before they equal the trees that are cut down. You asked a question about offsets too, and I'm not sure if I addressed that, but some companies want to offset their emissions by growing trees, and that's a whole another can of worms that involves bad math. If you can imagine the wool pulled over the people's eyes, that they can be persuaded that growing a tree is going to offset the carbon they emit in the air by driving the car or flying across the world. And the problem is that the trees that they protect, or they claim that are offset these emissions, are generally not growing as fast as they claim to be, or are cut down, or are burned. And we have a lot of fires here in this part of the country, of the world, and you can imagine the difficulty of trying to predict, decades in the future, the health of these trees. And they rely on that to make their claims that the trees are offsetting their emissions. It's simply bad math. I'm not sure I explained that very well.
What we're talking about from the sound of this is greenwashing, which is a marketing spin. We're all buying into this idea, oh, we'll use this company because they have a net zero because they're planting trees, right? So is that misinformation? And if it is, how does that actually get produced and legitimized?
There's a lot of misinformation that's floating around involving forests and carbon and climate. One of the bigger pieces of misinformation comes from a company called Drax in the wood pellet burning industry, where Drax is, as you may know, had a big coal plant north of London, largest coal plant in Western Europe, until they converted in around 2012 to burn wood pellets that they harvested in the United States and shipped across the ocean to these plants. And they call this power renewable. In the British government has been complicit in this. They've subsidized this activity and to the extent of billions or billions probably of euros, and they say it's carbon neutral, when in fact the burning of wood pellets is emitting more carbon per kilowatt hour than coal by a factor of 20 to 40%, and yet they call it renewable. That's just one example of the kind of greenwashing and misinformation that's floating out there, and and they get away with it because, although I do understand that the British government is cutting back on these subsidies, so we'll see what happens. But governments are starting to get wise to the math. It's simply bad math, and misinformation. Easy to do when you have companies that have these massive budgets for spending, public relations and so on.
Really interesting. I mean, we've got over 220 biomass power plants generating electricity in the UK, and it's the second largest source of renewable electricity here, and Drax, of course, being the largest. But if wood pellets is the most damaging example of greenwashing, why are we being sold the idea that that's a climate solution when obviously you're saying it's otherwise?
Well, I think there's a lot of money to be made in doing so. I'm sure you would agree that Drax is an incredibly wealthy company. They can make profits by claiming their product is carbon neutral. And by the way, Drax's scientific board advised them a few years ago to stop calling their product carbon neutral because it's simply not. They still use terms like that to get around, to mislead the public.
Yeah, and I have a feeling our government isn't actually stopping them either, because they want to see that as a renewable source. Interesting.
Well, a few years ago, you had a climate conference in Glasgow, and you had your prime minister at the time, was Boris Johnson, was talking about protecting the environment, protecting trees, and so on. At the same time, his government was subsidizing the burning of trees to make power, which is an incredibly polluting enterprise. And a lot of people have pointed out the hypocrisy and all that.
Why do governments keep backing these schemes, when, contrary to the evidence that we see?
I think it's the ideas that the timber industry, these companies put out, they sound like a good common sense solution to these problems of the climate and so on. And it doesn't take a high degree of math skill to look through their calculations to see that they're misleading the public. But politicians glom onto these ideas. They, mean jobs, economic benefits of producing wood products is real. But the climate benefits are not there. The timber industry would like to tell you that it's better to store carbon in a wood product like lumber or a plywood than it is to keep it in the forest. And that's kind of what you're up against.
Yeah, we have a real problem. And we're talking about cutting trees down. We are one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, in the top 10% now. We're a small country with a big population that needs to be fed and housed. But we often criticize deforestation in countries like Brazil. From your perspective, what responsibility do largely developed but historically deforested countries have?
Well, I think that the responsibility is towards the planet. We have to do things to restore the planet. And I know that, Britain has cut down a lot of its old trees. But the fact of the matter is that these are renewable resources. Trees will regrow. There's a body called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, an international scientific panel that was formulated by the United Nations a few decades ago, that have been looking at this issue. And by and large, they've ignored trees outside of the tropics, but they've ignored forests in the northern hemisphere as a part of the solution, simply because what I've been told, lobbying pressure from timber companies that have, kind of declared northern forests off limits to any kind of climate solution. And what we found in our book, in our research for our book, is that is, missing a huge amount of carbon that could be captured, that could be stored, that could change the trajectory of the climate if we would simply do it. What I mean by that is if we would simply protect these older, mature forests. I mean, there are forests that are younger that are perfectly fine for use of building houses and so on. We do need wood products. So I'm saying, and what my research found is that the older trees, the trees that store the most carbon, are the ones, and the bigger trees are the ones that we need to protect. And we can do that.
You can understand, though, countries that are still developing turning around and saying, well, you've had 300 years of doing all this stuff, 300 years of industrialization, and you're now lecturing us to hold up, to keep our forests when we want to cut our forests down and create farmland. It's very difficult for us to lecture them, isn't it?
Well, it is. And, we get accused of things like hypocrisy and so on. We're all in the same boat. Now we have to all realize that we have got to do something. We have got to take action. And it does mean stop burning fossil fuels. But if that's all we do, we're not going to get to where we need to be. And we need to protect forests as well. And if it means protecting forests that are in this region or another region, we need to protect them. And we've got to stop being small-minded about it.
I know that you've experienced some pretty devastating forest fires in your part of the US, West Coast. And I think you were actually writing your book whilst some of this was going on. Do you want to sort of describe what that felt like, sort of experiencing the effects?
So that is actually very true. We started the book out with a description of what it was like writing a book about forests while the forests all around us were burning down. And our skies were orange and black and gray, and the air was thick with smoke. For much of the later part of 2020, when we were really in the throes of writing this chapter. So it was witnessing climate change in real time while writing about climate change. A year later, in 2021, Portland, where I live, Oregon, experienced what they call a heat dome. We had temperatures in late June, of up to 124 degrees. Absolutely flabbergasted how hot it was. I could hardly walk down the block. It was so hot. I've never experienced anything like that before, other than when I stuck my head into an oven once. It's that hot.
I guess you expect that kind of thing in Arizona, but maybe not where you are up in the Northwest.
I mean, it's rare for us to get a day of 100-degree temperature. And 124 is simply mind-blowing.
Well, governments, including the UK, are investing heavily in engineered carbon capture. Based on your research, why should listeners be skeptical about this? And when they hear all these promises.
Well, you look at how much they've achieved thus far, and and compare that with how much money they've invested. We're talking about billions of dollars in investment that have been directed. I'm talking more than 100 billion for this technology, and the results are on the order of, as I said, 0.1% of annual emissions. Hardly a drop in the bucket. And, we'd like to see some results. I'm not saying that carbon capture is impossible or they shouldn't do it, but it's not working. And I question whether it's a wise choice to be investing all this money into something that does not work. And there are things that we know that can work, and we should do, like, for example, build wind turbines or solar panels or protect forests.
Yeah. I think the last round of UK funding was the government was investing, I think, 21.7 something like that billion. I mean, it's just an insane amount. I mean, obviously our company's a little bit smaller than the US, but that is an awful lot of investment from the UK.
That money, by the way, let me emphasize this point, is money that is not spent on things that actually do work. I mean, if you had spent $1.7 billion or euros or whatever it is on wind or solar power, just think how much further ahead you would be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm changing subject slightly, but one of the most powerful ideas in the book seems to be the forests aren't just about trees; they're connected to salmon, rivers, and animals and people. Why do you think that this sort of systems view matters so much for climate solutions?
Yeah, you mentioned salmon. In our region of the world, we have these enormous salmon runs. I know that you guys have a history of salmon there as well. Salmon, historically, we had runs that were on the order of 45, 50 million salmon come up our streams to spawn every year. And they would spawn in the forest, right? And studies have shown that salmon from the ocean, they spend 3 or 4 years in the ocean before they come back and spawn. They absorb all kinds of nutrients from the ocean and bring it back to the forest, and that fertilizes the forest. So what we've done with the salmon is very much what we've done with the tree. What we've done with the salmon is very much like what we've done with the trees. We've almost eliminated all of them. We're down to like 1%, 2% of our historic run size. I mean, think of a typical salmon, 25 pounds. It's a 25-pound bag of fertilizer swimming over a river to deposit its carcass in the forest, which is then carried by eagles, bears, wolves, whatever wildlife is around, into the forest and fertilizing the trees, and makes the trees grow faster. There's been a study that shows that a tree near a salmon spawning site will grow 3 times faster than a tree further away. So you can see that there's a definite climate benefit for having salmon around. And yet, of course, we've destroyed the salmon alongside the forest. So we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, it just goes to show how interconnected everything is. Listening to everything that you're saying here, it's so easy just to feel completely overwhelmed. Where do you think meaningful action still exists? I mean, what can people actually do to help?
I often asked this question. I like to respond. I like to quote an ancient Chinese proverb. I guess proverb might be the right word. Best time to plant a tree, according to the ancient Chinese, was 20 years ago. And the next best time to plant a tree is today. We like to, if you're going to time travel, we found the best time to plant a tree was 1,000 years ago. And the best thing that you can do today is to protect that tree.
Yeah, that's very, very sage advice.
The sage advice from the Chinese.
They're very good at it. So final question, where do you still see realistic hope over the next decade?
I see it in the people around me who I've been talking to, who are forest advocates, who are working hard to protect these trees. And the timber industry wants to cut them down. One of the things I like to say is that, if you're going to protect a tree, you have to work it. It's hard. It's hard work. You have to work at it every day. But a timber company wants to cut it down. They can do it all in one day. And that's kind of what you're up against. It's hard work, but you can do it. And there are people who are eager, excited, and willing to take this on and rise up against the timber industry, which has, all kinds of advantages, including a United States president who is eager as hell to cut every tree down he can. And we have a lot of trees that are on federal land owned by the U.S. government that he has control over. And he's not an environmentalist, obviously. He's opposed to resolving climate change. He opposes wind farms, which you guys have a lot in your neck of the woods. So until we get rid of this president, very little is going to be done. And so that is the main obstacle here. We have to elect leaders who understand the problem, who are willing to take action, that are actual solutions, rather than follow the propaganda from the timber industry or any other industry.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And we have a term here, which is actually a pejorative term, which is tree hugger. But actually, the people that do that, the people that climb in trees and stop them from being cut down, should be considered heroes, because every tree that we save is helping us in our fight with climate change right now.
Well, trees have been regulating the climate for thousands and thousands of years. The idea of protecting a tree for the climate is not something that a tree hugger dreamed up last week. It's a proven fact that trees do this for the climate, and tree huggers have glommed onto it, but it's not. They're not the only ones that think this way. Journalists like me think this way too. I guess I might be a tree hugger.
Yeah, I think historically, not even historically, currently even, maybe there were sort of, native people of America, how do you think they fit into trying to protect these areas you talk about?
Well, it's interesting. When white settlers arrived in this part of the country in the mid-1800s, the forests were all intact. There were some forest fires. There was some intentional burning by the indigenous people for their own purposes, to grow food and so on. But their management of the forest, their stewardship of the forest resources was exceptional. And it didn't take long for the white people to come by and wreck it all. I think that's one argument. That's one argument for giving back to the tribes, to the indigenous people, control of their forest, their ancient homelands, which, by the way, as in many parts of the world, were stolen from them.
Paul, thank you for joining us on this Bylines Network podcast. Thank you for getting up so early in the morning. It's nice to meet you and reach out across the pond. Some commentary on where we stand on forest preservation and indeed climate change. Really fascinating chat. And thank you to my co-host, Anna. So that's Mark. I'm signing off from here in Stratford-upon-Avon, UK.
Well, I want to thank you both for a very pleasurable chat. And it's really a good experience talking to people in the UK about these things.
Paul, thanks so much for joining us at such an ungodly hour. I agree with Mark. You gave us lots of food for thought by shining a light on some of the murkier and, I think, troublesome aspects surrounding climate change. Our listeners can find details of where to get hold of Canopy of Titans in the show notes. Paul's one request is you buy it from an ethical and ideally local bookshop. I'm Anna, signing out from Suffolk Coastal. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Mark and Anna, and thank you very much for joining, listeners. Remember, if you wish to contribute to our cause, we have an ongoing crowdfunding page to help the network expand. Donate only if you can and whatever you can. Every little really helps. If you go onto the Bylines Network site now, you can subscribe to our Gazette, a monthly edition featuring the best of our bylines. Until next time, thank you.